we do organize the steering committee in Paris, but this time we realized that for different reasons, it was difficult to bring all the people to Paris. And so we added a Zoom steering committee, and we follow up with a Zoom international roundtable to discuss an important topic for the future research of Gerpisa, which is this new industrial sector, I would say. It existed before, but of course, battery production is taking a completely new scale, new technologies, and of course, new jobs. And this is a topic that so far has not been too much discussed. It's definitely a new topic for Gerpisa. And so we thought it would be useful to gather together a roundtable. Thomas Klier will be the chair of the roundtable. So perhaps if you're okay, Thomas, I will shift to you the floor to just introduce how the roundtable is going to be organized and then start it up. Is that okay?
Yeah, of course. I would be delighted to do that. Thank you, Tommaso. And hello, everybody. I'm Thomas Klier. My day job is at Chicago Fed as a senior economist. I'm delighted to be hosting this Gerpisa roundtable, our virtual version of the mini conference in January 2023. And through the Gerpisa, we are an international network. We're bringing together people from around the major time zones. So it's good morning, good afternoon, and good night to everybody who's on the call. It's just starting to get light in Chicago and Canada. And that's who we are. That's our advantage. We can bring people together from around the world. So just a couple of housekeeping notes before we get started. We have 3 of the 4 panelists checked in. So that's my colleague, Kristin Dziczek, who's based in Detroit. She'll be talking about North America. Obviously, there's Tommaso, who's already opened up the event, talking to us from Brussels, and Marc Allocher, who's at the École Polytechnique. And hopefully we'll be able to have Boy join us. And the idea was for him to cover China. So we got North America, Europe, and China/Asia. The idea is we have, as you saw in the posting, and as Tommaso indicated, in the big picture context of shifting towards electrification, there's lots to talk about. So the idea is to bandy around the big picture questions among the panelists first, for maybe 60 minutes or so until we run out of things to talk about, and then open it up to all of you who have joined us this morning for your questions to the experts on the roundtable this morning. So without further ado, I think we're just going to get started then. And if Boy's going to join us, he's going to join us on the fly. Hopefully, he will be able to do that. So jumping right in. Yes, the big changeover towards electrification opens up just a few questions. So let's start with the the underlying factors as we individually see it that are shaping the fast growth of battery investments. There's serious resources being committed. Not a day goes by where not another big number gets bandied around. Financial resources committed to one side of the industry, and then of course implicitly not committed to another. So let me start with Kristin, and then we're going to go to Marc and then Tommaso. What factors do you see that are shaping the fast growth of the battery investments and battery production in the major market that you're most familiar with? So Kristin, go ahead, take us away.
Okay, sorry, I had to unmute. So, the U.S. had investment announcements in batteries and electric vehicle announcements last year of over almost $74 billion of private investment. The market share of plug-in vehicles, so battery electric, fuel cell, and plug-in hybrids has doubled over the course of the 3 years of the pandemic. We're about to see an onslaught of new product hitting showrooms, so much more consumer choice. So as consumers are starting to pick up, there's a lot more metal in the showrooms for them to look at. It's still a very small segment of our market, about 6 or 7%, but poised to get a real shot in the arm with federal legislative support. The Biden administration had, I would say, 3 pieces of legislation that will really help incentivize battery electric growth here in the US and in corollary in North America. The first was the infrastructure bill that put out some money for making a more resilient grid, and a down payment on a national fast charging network. So $7.5 billion for fast charging. I was just in DC this week at a charging panel at the SAE conference. They're estimating that's about 1/10 of what we need. So 7.5 billion, a small down payment on fast charging, and that is a big component of consumer acceptance, is feeling that they're confident to drive across our big country and be able to charge where they go. The second piece, I'm going to do the smaller one first, is the CHIPS Act. The semiconductor crisis has been particularly difficult in U.S. production and North American production, and this administration has decided to form an industrial policy around more homegrown chips, including for mature technologies, which is a investment challenge in a mature market with mature technologies to make an ROI on putting down a big expensive chip plant. But there's estimates of 2 to 3 times as many chips in an EV and an EV with automation features. So those chips are going to be very necessary too. And then the last is the big kahuna, the Inflation Reduction Act, and that got a lot of headlines here around the consumer incentives, which are very they are $7,500 per vehicle, half for meeting a certain a prohibition on having any excluded entities, sourcing from any excluded entities, which by and large means China, but also Russia, North Korea, and other countries like that. We don't yet know how those content requirements and the exclusions are going to be operationalized, because the Treasury Department's guidance was supposed to be out in December, and now they've kicked that down the can kicked the can down the road till the end of March. So we're still, waiting on that. They did give guidance on commercial vehicle credits, which was sort of a bolt onto an existing program. And the guidance there might calm some of our trading partners, because they are allowing that $7,500 credit for leased vehicles. And the commercial credit does not have a North American assembly requirement, does not have any content requirements, and does not have an excluded entity requirement. So with the commercial side, you could see a lot more imports or vehicles that don't meet these higher content requirements being lease vehicles instead of purchase, and still meet the $7,500, at least initially. The catch to the commercial credit is that it is $7,500 on a light vehicle, or 30% of the differential between the battery electric version and an ICE version. So as you get convergence between battery electric and ICE costs, then you get to, that lease credit will evaporate. And you also have to count that the lease company will pass some of that credit on to consumers. The thing I think a lot of people missed was that there are incredible manufacturing incentives as well. A number of different ways of putting the money out to manufacturers. The big one is for battery production, $35 for cell production and $10 for pack, so $45 a kilowatt hour ongoing as a production tax credit. So there are already investment credits that are offered by states and local areas. And, you know, in Canada and Mexico, there are federal and provincial incentives for these battery plants, but the US has got a production credit for every kilowatt hour produced. And 10% of the costs incurred in creating, in extracting and creating critical minerals. So those phase out between 2030 and 2033 when these credits end. There's some conversion credits and some loan programs as well to help convert facilities to making battery electric or battery component manufacturing, and to establish new plants as well. So there's some new federal money coming into the investment side as well as the production side. So a big amount of money going into really turning the US around and you know, giving it a shot in the arm for that market share to grow. So that's my first start.
Okay, great. So key factor here, of course, then for North America is government policies and gobs of money shaping then you know, decisions in the private sector, and we'll come back to that shortly. So thanks, Kristin, for getting us started. I think I said Mark was going to go next, but I don't remember. So Mark, are you here?
Yeah. Okay.
How does it look like from your perspective?
Okay. So hello, everybody. So on my side, I started the observation at the end of 2017 when I joined the École Polytechnique to make some research about the future of the automotive industry. And what I have observed is, in fact, there are two different waves of investment. All of them are driven by regulation or action from public authorities. So if I go back roughly to 2017, the main regulation at this time was the CAFE, on the target of 95 grams of CO2 per kilometer in 2020, which was accessible by automakers by selling a few BEVs on some PHEVs. After that, it was to be 81 in 2025, 59 in 2013, unknown in 2035, but it was obvious, I think, for automakers that BEV become mandatory. And if they need BEVs, they need battery systems. Mm-hmm. And the two main constraints, I think, for the automakers, the first one was to be sure they could supply of the battery packs they needed to produce their BEVs. And the second one was to have an efficient production system. And battery pack is a huge bulk, it's very costly, transportation is very complicated. So German automakers at this time announced huge investment in gigafactories, which were located close to their main assembly plants. At this time, cells were mainly supplied by subsidiaries of Asian battery makers located in Central Europe. For the other automakers, PSA, which was at this time Peugeot, Citroën, and Opel, which is now Stellantis, was not very actively committed to BEVs at this time. Carlos Tavares, CEO of PSA, or now Stellantis, was at this time the president of the Association of the European Automaker, and he was fiercely opposed to BEVs. Almost the same situation on Fiat, and Renault at this time was relying on his existing range and announced the launching of hybrid vehicles as of mid-2020. At the same time, European Commission understood that there was an absence of European mass production capacity by European champions. As I said, there were mainly subsidiaries of Asian battery makers located in Europe, but no production from European champions. Therefore, by the end of 2017, they decided to launch the European Battery Alliance, which was complemented in 2018 by 6 strategic priorities, so a kind of frameworks. Main topics were secure access to raw materials, support to European battery manufacturing with investment on R&D plans, development of skilled workforce. At the same time, they have launched the idea of what is called important project of common European interest. And the first one was decided in 2019, addressing raw materials, cells, modules, and battery system. It was approved by the Commission with a value of 8.2 billion of euros. It is a total of public of private funding. And obviously, the total amount is much lower than the figure announced by Kristin for USA for the same time of product. The second wave, it's still ongoing. So we still have the CAFE. So the CAFE, there is a more stringent regulation with 43 grams CO2 in 2030 and 0 in 2035, which means there is no choice but BEV. In addition, there is another regulation, Euro 7, which is replacing the existing one, Euro 6, which is for pollutants, which, by the way, are extended to tires and brakes emission. And this new regulation makes it extremely costly to produce IC for the European market, especially in a very short duration, say 12, 13 years, for an industry which is used to large volumes. So on one side, you have the CAFE, on the other side, you have the Euro 7, and this accelerates the speed of introduction for BEVs. No way to escape, even if the Commission lets the door open for some alternative, but which seem to be very, very marginal. Consequently, all automakers have announced creation of gigafactories close to their plants, and this time including cell production close to the production of vehicles. On the battery side, there are two different waves, I would say. The first one is in the continuation of what was already decided, and that's pushed to the launching of SYSU, Automotive Cell Company, which was at the beginning a joint venture between PSA and Saft, which is a subsidiary of Total, one of the major of oil and gas. And this joint venture was joined by Mercedes in 2021 on a second project of common interest, again with 12 billion of euros, not a big amount of money. But the main, and I think most important regulation is the one dedicated to the battery directive, decision to replace the existing battery directive, which is in force for, I think, roughly 15 or 16 years, which at the very beginning addresses all types of batteries, not only for vehicles. This is still the case, but obviously there is a lot of items in this new directive addressing battery electric vehicles. And I think there are three main parts of this regulation which have a huge impact on the future of the industry. The first one is the declaration of carbon footprint, which is mandatory as of July 1st, 2024. And after that, that will be complemented by setting of carbon footprint performance classes on maximum threshold values. So it's obviously to put a pressure on the industry to be sure that battery production is located in Europe. Second one is about battery recycling efficiency with some threshold again. 65% of battery have to be recycled by the beginning of 2025, 70% 2030. And the third one is about a material recovery obligation for cobalt, copper, lithium, and nickels, again with deadlines 2026 and 2030. And in 2030, what is expected is 70% recovery of lithium and 95% for the other raw materials. So all these items of this regulation obviously push for a complete localization of a complete value chain. As a consequence, many projects arise from many newcomers in the industry. We probably have a battery overcapacity production in Europe if all projects achieve their goals, which is not sure at all, but anyway, there is a huge risk of having an overcapacity. And if I can just end up the first part of my presentation, my opinion, which can be obviously discussed later on, is that European regulations are, at the time being, obviously the most radical and the fastest transition to BEVs. So that's was my first part of the intervention.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, so you introduced a new element, so similar to what Kristin told us, of course, the enormous impact and importance of government policies, and then the public money committed. And then you opened the door to talk about the implications for the value chain in automotive manufacturing. We'll come back to that. round out that first question just momentarily. So Tommaso, let's go to you. Back to the first order question. What factors are shaping the fast growth of battery investment and battery production from your point of view?
I will repeat some of the things that have been already said, but I think the first element is really to have in mind that how much this is accelerated. I was looking at the report by the IEA, the International Agency of Energy, with their scenarios about electrification. And they had a base scenario 4 years ago that was of 130 million vehicles of stock for 2030, and a very ambitious one, the EV30 scenarios with 220 million vehicles in stock for 2030. Now, 4 years later, the most ambitious scenario has almost become the baseline scenario. Okay, now their state policy scenario is now announcing 200 million EVs. So based on the current policies, with no further acceleration, we have now increased by 40% the speed of electrification according to the forecast of the IEA. So that gives you an idea of how much faster we are moving and how much things have accelerated in the last 4 years. So what have been the factors that have shaped this acceleration, that have pushed this acceleration? Of course, there is the need to reduce carbon emission, but this need was already there 4 years ago. And this has not really changed too much. So I agree with all the other two speakers that there are other factors that are pushing electrification. And I think that industrial policies, together with all these regulations, play a very important role. And I think it all started in China. So I take a general overview of that, with the new energy vehicle policies that have been very successful in shaping a new sector, both in the production of EVs, but also in the production of battery, which position now China as the world leader, which has half of the stock of electric vehicles in the world, 70 up to 80% of the capacity according to different statistics in terms of battery productions, the full control of cathode productions, so 70% of raw materials. So the industrial policy in China has triggered as a reactions industrial policies elsewhere. So that's been a very important factor. It's been so successful that now it's pushing industrial policy, not for the reason of matching, of achieving CO2 targets per se, but just to catch up with China and not be left behind in the race towards electrification. So we already listened about the industrial policy in the United States and Europe, so I will not add details about that. There's a huge amount of money. Here again, there's new regulation coming up each year. We started in Europe with CO2 regulations that have accelerated very significantly after the Dieselgate. And now we see real industrial policy, really supporting the creation of a battery industry, supporting the development of electric production. I would like to think a little bit about the implication of these policies for works and employment. Now, not getting to the details of that, but just developing a little bit, looking forward also other questions that will come. I think that we can say that if the Chinese industrial policies will keep being successful, this might have negative implications for the future of work and employment, because most of the companies that are located in China are companies that are developing an employment relationship, which is rather characteristic of the electric component, portable consumer electronics. And these are bad employment relationships. I think Lüthje, I hope he will join us. We talk about foxonizations of the employment relationship that is currently going on in China, and in which you have a lot of, there used to be switch shops. So when we look at the productions of Li-ion battery for portable computers, the evidence we have from the early 2010 is very bad working conditions, a lot of migrant workers, very intensive work pace, very low base wage, huge turnover. And the evidence we have from the most recent EVs, the production of batteries for EVs, is just a slight upgrading on that, but reproducing the same type of employment relationship. So if the industrial policies of China keep being very successful and the dominance, control, hegemonic position will be reproduced in the future, that might mean that most of the jobs in this industry will be bad jobs. Nevertheless, all these industrial policies that we've been listening already about, United States and Europe, aim at challenging that. And I think that this might have positive implication for employment. First of all, because we see for the first time in decades, reindustrialization, new big projects coming to high-wage countries. And high-wage countries have strongest unions, in particular in the automotive sector. So the capacity of this union of bargaining good jobs, of integrating the new jobs created in the battery industry as automotive jobs, which is not evident in China, as jobs that are part of the conventions and the agreements that characterize the automotive industry, which are generally good conventions, good jobs, is much stronger. I think there is a risk also to see other countries, not poor countries, but semi-peripheral countries, to be initially excluded from these transitions because of that. And that might have negative implication, of course, for work and employment in these countries. And I think what is missing now in most of these policies is indeed thinking regionally. It looks like many countries are just in a race to attract this industry, to develop this production, and there is no much, it's a market competition with a lot of public money, but there is not really coordination and not really thinking about how do we integrate semi-peripheral countries in this transition? How do we integrate Mexico? How do we integrate Central Eastern European countries, others than legacy producer of internal combustion engines or assemblers of low-cost battery for Korean manufacturers? So that is a question that is there. Another positive implication is the shortening of supply chain, which is embedded in these policies. We know that regional supply chain, global supply chain have had a quite negative impact on employment, have fragmented industries, have put competition between different group of workers, have tend to relocate production towards the countries that offer the lowest employment protection, lowest labor protection, lowest wages. And so shortening supply chain might have a very positive impact, reinforce the power of stakeholders in their bargaining power for having good jobs and good working conditions. You know, so it seems that labor costs for battery production are not so decisive. It's a relatively high capital intensive industry, and also clean energy and cheap energy might be a factor as much as important that labor input. So there is also a matter of a different priorities perhaps in company investing. And we've seen, for example, in Europe, 80% of the future gigafactory are in high wage countries. And in the United States, I think it's up to 95%. There is just one project I've heard so far that is a Tesla project that probably has been announced or will be announced in Mexico. So that's a first consideration. Now, I think that industrial policy is not the only factor accelerating things here. There's been a huge amount of venture capital getting into battery production. So there is a lot of startups there. Of course, Tesla has been a big factor here, the success of Tesla. We've seen that in 2021, the capital evaluation of Tesla has gone up to 1,000 billion euros, something just ridiculous. And now it's down by a certain amount. But also when we look at battery producers, there is this battery index of the EEA, the agency for the International Agency for Energy, 315% increase between 2018 and 2021 in capital evaluation, which is 4 times more than the top 10 OEMs in the same analysis. And that shows that battery makers startups in battery makers are also benefit from these huge amount of money given by venture capital. And for example, one of the biggest investors in battery making in Europe is Northvolt, which is a Swedish startup. And we have Verkor in France. And there are other startups in the United States that are looking into manufacturing solid state batteries and innovating fast. So there is a lot of startups getting into these. And so venture capital is also playing a role in accelerating that. And I think that the positive aspect here is that these companies probably will not be able to compete just on cost with the East Asian giants of battery manufacturing. We'll have to look for other productive models, other source of profits. If I take the example of Northvolt, is really making the greenest possible battery, a full recycling system put in place from the beginning, a circular economy business model. And so they're looking for other source of value than just bare cost, just getting the lowest cost per kilowatt, but not providing different type of products with different value proposition attached, can also be current with more positive employment relationship, I believe, than the one proposed by these Asian companies. On the negative side, evidence so far, we'll go back to that later, from Tesla, for instance, do not suggest that the employment relationship with this company is very good. And we know that startups, in particular when they employ lower skilled people, or they don't, like Uber, but they use them, but they tend to develop a bad employment relation. And last point is the shift in lobbying power. I think this is another aspect. We've seen that for many years, electrification was there, but the lobbying power of automakers was strong enough to slow down things. Now we've seen a shift and a shift in balance. This is very evident in Europe with the Dieselgate. Things are flipped very quickly. Volkswagen has shifted completely position because it was the main target of the Dieselgate scandal. And now that means that in many strategic places, the power is in the hands of pro-electric lobby, pro-electric coalition of actors. And also car makers start to see fast electrification as a strategic option for them. They don't want to lose the race. They want more market share for electric vehicles. They want to be able to have subsidies for manufacturing batteries. So this means that these accelerate things even further. And has two implications for me for the work and employment. One negative, which is that whatever will happen, we will not go backwards. If we lose a lot of jobs, if electric vehicles will be too expensive, it will be regions and countries disrupted, I don't believe that any OEMs will be able to say, hey, stop, slow down, give me more time. That will be very difficult to achieve. On the other way around, we see concepts like the just transition that has been promoted by trade unions in Europe, which is also there in the United States, being integrated by this lobbying. You have environmental lobbyists, NGOs, Ministry of Transport, of Environment, integrating just transition as a conditions for regulating the future of electric mobility. And that provides opportunity for trade unions to bargaining protection for the workers that are phased out or dislocated, and also condition for creating good jobs. So I think that there are these three different forces that are, and different industrial policies that are really shaping the acceleration with different implications we're already seeing on the quality of jobs, on the future of jobs in this industry. And I stop.
Thanks. Yeah, no, that's good. Thanks, Tommaso. And so you've opened the door, to one sort of really, really important facet of this discussion when you have almost entire change in, whatever it is, the way the industry operates, the business model, and what have you. Everything's interconnected, right? So we started talking about factors shaping the change, and now we're talking about that. We're talking about implications for the supply chain. We're talking about implications for labor relations. And so, in terms of our game plan, so we're at 40 minutes into the 60 minutes. I want to do two things here next. First, I want to check if Boy is here, if he's able to join us, because it would be his turn to speak. I have not seen him there. So, Tommaso, was he able to join? Okay.
I was speaking with his colleague, Professor Zhao is with us, and we know that Boy is on a holiday in Hawaii, where he's probably very late at night or very early in the morning. And he said he would be available, but apparently has not connected. So that might have been a problem because of the time there. Anyway, perhaps in the discussion, Professor Zhao knows also very well the reality of the battery electric industry in China. Will be able to ask questions and provide some. They work together now in the same university. They cooperated on several papers, so it's definitely will be able to fill up a little bit for Boy if he's not able to join us.
Okay, so that's okay. So I like this. So then let's keep China until we move into the discussion in about 20 minutes. So in the meantime, here's the game plan. There are two objectives that, as a moderator, I want to achieve before we hit the full hour and before we bring the Q&A session in. I want to give everybody a chance to sort of chime in on the major topics, in addition to the first question I asked for the go around, supply chain implications and labor relations. And I'm going to go to Kristin first and then to Mark next. And the last question, I'm going to just one more go around to all three of you. And that is, what this means for Gerpisa as a network, as a collective of researchers around the world. What are the things that we need to be looking at in order to stay ahead of these radical changes as they're accelerating? So those two elements. So Kristin, you're next to sort of catch up to the main topics that Tommaso opened. Floor is yours.
Well, and Mark as well. I think, the role of regulatory policy in the US has been a pendulum. With whoever occupies our White House, sort of more stringent fuel economy requirements, less and greenhouse gas and less so. But we have this weird thing of the state of California and several states that align with California that have much more stringent air emissions standards. That's about a third of our market in the US, and so they are charging forward with ZEV mandates and things like that at the same time. There is a concern, I think, on the ICE side that there's so much investment going to the battery electric. The requirements are going to be ramped up for the 2026 and beyond fuel economy and greenhouse gas regulations, and producers are going to have to tie up more closely with their suppliers to make those investments to meet more stringent fuel economy requirements on the ICE side of things. And when we had the Gerpisa meeting this summer in Detroit, we heard from Ford talking about going to single sourcing so that they could have those tie-ups and those deep relationships with suppliers that, they're going to have shrinking volumes and higher technical requirements. I think, the other point that Tommaso brings up and is really critical here in the US is the view of investors and Wall Street. Tesla was the most valuable company, and many automakers and suppliers were sort of chasing some of that Tesla magic to show that they too were disruptors. They were disrupting themselves. If we have suppliers that are dividing themselves, and even automakers that are dividing themselves into their EV and their ICE components to show the different values of being in those two markets and those two technologies. So we can never discount the role of Wall Street and the investors' view of how this is going to work. On the investor view, there is, some of the investor analysts that I follow are seeing this labor requirement and the regionalization of the battery supply chain, that these higher labor costs that might incur by a regional supply chain being offset by the longer supply chains, the logistics and the freight that might have been required. So, my back of the envelope was, paying US wages and paying like UAW US wages was a couple $100 a battery pack. When battery packs are like $11,000, $12,000, a couple $100 is 3-4%, and that is pretty easy to offset with the logistics and the freight that would be required to bring these batteries and packs in from further afield. So I think that's pretty critical. We also, in the US, on the labor side, there's one battery plant that has voted for union representation, the GM LG plant in Ohio. That's the only Detroit 3 joint venture that is up and running. At this point, there are several others that have been announced and are being built, but that don't yet have employees. And that's the critical point here, is that once they have employees, the union can either call for a card check or an election to represent the workers there. This is the year that the Detroit 3 contracts with the UAW and with Unifor both expire in September. These joint ventures are arm's length. They're not part of those master agreements, but they're absolutely going to be a part of the discussion at the table, because you have eventually there will be rationalization of the plants that are making ICE, or insourcing and reinvestment in those plants. So that will be at the table, as well as potentially new leadership at the UAW. There is new leadership at Unifor that just took office in August. We had a nice interview with her at our conference last week with Lana Payne. And by the end of February, we should know who the new president of the UAW is, whether it's the current incumbent or a challenger. So there's not a lot of time to get up and running and get these negotiations over the hump this summer and into fall, and many contentious issues in addition to this shift to EVs. The biggest one, I think, on the in the U.S. side, and I understand also in Canada, is the impact of inflation on wages, and that these workers do not have an automatic accelerant, a cost of living adjustment in their agreements. Those went away during the bankruptcy rounds. In the U.S., they were put on hold in Canada, and then they come back, and then they go on hold again. So that revision to bringing back cost of living is a paramount concern, as well as the EVs. So, I think the regionalization is likely to drive up our costs on the labor side, but there's lots and lots of things that can offset it. And the direction that Wall Street takes does have a big determinant on where the investments will be going.
Thank you, Kristin, for touching on many of these things rather comprehensively. And I'm glad you mentioned the interview that you did with Laura Payne as part of our conference last week. Maybe, all these bits and pieces have been recorded and they're easily digestible on our website. Maybe we can share the link with the audience. I think that interview in particular would be, there's a strong interest in labor issues in this network. So that might be a particular interest to people who weren't able to attend the event. Okay, so Mark, I'm going to come back to you to give you a chance to chime in on the topics that you didn't cover, when you had the microphone first. So be cognizant of the time. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, so I try to be fast. In terms of restructuration of the existing automotive value chain, well, so far, and probably this word is the most important of what I'm going to say, in a paper that I wrote with John Paul McDuffie and Christoph Midler, and is published by ICC in 2022, we made a survey of 19 automakers, including 5 newcomers, 2 from USA and 3 from China. And what we found is that the automakers still manage value chain, and in fact, they have increased verticalization. They all produce BEVs in a process which is very similar to ICEs, and sometimes in the same plants and the same assembly lines. On top of that, almost 2/3 of them make or allied to make battery pack on electric powertrain in-house, and 50% have a mastery of the battery management system. And the battery management system is the new DNA of the car. This is because what you manage with the BMS is what the customer can see. This is a question of speed, of autonomy, and the charging process. So with automaker moving on the field of the BMS, up to me, I think it's quite clear that they are really in the move to mastering battery, at least with the liquid actual technology. Don't know what's happened with next technology. And what we could have expected mainly is that battery makers would overcome automaker and take the lead of the automotive value chain, just didn't happen again so far. It could change in the future, even if recent announcements are mostly in favor of more allied to make with different battery makers or battery components makers. As far as the battery production process is concerned, and if I exclude mining and refining of raw materials, this is a combination, in fact, of a highly automated process, which are very specific to this industry for battery components, electrode, electrolyte, separators, and battery cells as well, and partially automated process for modules and battery pack assembly. And these jobs are much closer to what is known usually in the automotive industry. So if I summarize in terms of creation of job, we could see creation of mainly highly skilled job for battery component and battery cells, such as process control, maintenance, quality control, and assembly jobs for modules and pack. Again, things could change because the final steps of this process could change with the generalization of new packaging, such as cells to pack, which is already done by CATL, cell to chassis, which is not existing at the time being, having array instead of module like BID is doing. So I think there is still some uncertainty about what are the type of job which are going to be required in the last stages of final assembly of the battery pack. In terms of what does it mean in terms of upgrading, reproduction of, or downgrading of the automotive employment relationship? The first point is when you have a look to the manufacturing process of an EV, from stamping to final assembly, it's very similar to IC, not big differences, and assembly times are very close. There are no real changes, in fact, when you have a look very deeply. Probably the main change is that some stages of the final assembly process, some operation have to be done when you have a product which is 400 volts, which is obviously need to have very high skilled trainer and different competencies. But I think this is the main difference. And this is highly evidences that what I said, that almost 100% of automakers produce EVs in a very similar way to the ones they produce IC. So in this case, I think it's mainly a question of reproduction with some new competencies. And I think the quick question here is much more about how many cars are they going to produce in the future. At one time, we were pretty close to producing 100 million. I think it's very far from us now. So I think the future of production of vehicles is much more related to the volume of production which is going to be requested in the years to come. And there are also other factors which may be much more impacting than the change in technology for the powertrain, which is Industry 4.0, to make it short and don't explain in too much details, or the future in manufacturing, which may have also more impact than the switch from IC to BEVs. On the powertrain side, so it's a suppression of many parts, components like exhaust line, fuel system, injection control, and also loss of many jobs in foundry, forging, and machining for e-motor and the gearbox. So it's obviously job suppression, basically I would say a downgrading in terms of the quality of job and the relationship between automakers and the supplier of the different components. On the battery side, I'm not quite sure what to say. So I already been talking about very highly skilled job in terms of production of battery component of battery cells. But if I take just a very simple example, the last Megane, electric Megane from Renault, it has a 60 kilowatt battery, which means 12 modules, 24 cells each module, which means that when you have a car per minute, you have 12 modules per minute and 288 cells per minute. So it's mainly 5 cells per second. So it's a very, very complex mass production system. Probably one of the most complex the automotive industry has to deal with, because even today, when you have many, many parts in gearboxes and engines, you don't need to produce so many parts per second. So I think it's the very first time the industry is going to face this challenge. So I think it's very difficult to assess precisely how many jobs and the importance of the quality of jobs which will be created once the ramp-up is going to be successfully achieved to produce this amount of battery pack. And I think this ramp-up is going to take quite a long time. So we probably need 3, 4, 5 years to be really to have a good understanding of what are going to be new jobs in the battery production system. So this is the end for this part.
Wow. Okay. So I'm impressed that how much we've been able to touch and yet trying to stick within our time frame. So great thanks to the three of you. I have the following suggestion on how to segue into. We have about 40 people still attending, and they're probably all waiting so they can jump in with questions to us. As a segue, why don't Tommaso? Why don't you just talk for a few minutes about the working groups that Gerpisa opened up, I think, in response to thinking about, setting particular focal areas of research to deal with this transition. And maybe that's a good segue then for the audience to jump in. Would you want to do that?
Okay, because I planned to complete a little bit about what I said before. I would try to be very brief because we have some work that has been done. Unfortunately, Boy is not with us, but he has done some field work in battery makers in China and has provided some evidence in recent report. We've done some joint reports for the European Trade Union Institute, which are available on the European Trade Union Institute website on the future of the automotive, I think. And so in my view, as we have like a new continent of jobs emerging very fast. We have just mentioned the amount of investment. These investments are jobs. And we know, for example, we anticipate in the pipeline to 10 years that will be 8 new terawatt of capacity. And what he suggests is that each gigawatt makes like between 80 and 200 jobs, depending on the vertical integration, just in battery manufacturing, which is cells and modules and packaging. So that is between 800,000 and 1.6 million new jobs coming. And if they come, they substitute for other jobs. So that gives an idea of how much the landscape of work and employment in the automotive industry will be changed in the next 10 years. And so I think that's for Gerpisa, this is a very important topic. And we will have depending on the pace that is accelerating, are huge disruptions. And the battery industry, and I'm not saying the part that will be integrated by final assembly in car manufacturing, the package, but just the cells, the electrodes, and also some part of the value chain, the refining. I don't know if we integrate that in the automotive supply chain or not, but it will become a major employer of the automotive sectors. And it looks like a very oligopolistic one, with few companies taking a huge control of the future of the employment in the. So I think it's very important for us to characterize how these companies, what type of employment relationship will develop. And I think that there is a struggle now to control the market. So all these investments are raised to take control of the market, which means that the market has not a clear conception of control. It's not clear who will be controlling. So we have East Asian companies that are dominant, and they have really a dominant position now. And I've already said, if they keep reproducing their dominance, this is a bad news for future jobs because they're bad employers. And I think Boy, unfortunately, is not here, but perhaps Zhao will be able to talk about that. Yes, the new factories, the new gigafactories to manufacture big lithium-ion batteries for EVs have slightly better employment relationship of what we have seen in China 10 years ago for the battery for the iPhones. They are not so bad, but they are basically reproducing the same characteristic. A lot of migrant workers, low trade unions or no trade unions present, very individualized contract, high turnover, a lot of overtime, so very bad jobs. And the first evidence we have from Europe of Korean companies like SKA in Hungary or LG in Poland is that they pay higher wages. I've also checked that, and if you then the equivalent in China, but they are bad jobs. There are clear reports that we have now that suggest that really these are considered as low value added bad jobs and with bad working condition, a lot of overtime, and also some problems in safety and health. So if these are the group of companies that will dominate the future of the battery industry, and we have to keep in mind, if you take LG, SK, Samsung, Panasonic, and their investment in future capacity for 2030 is more than the total demand that is expected. So they are clearly aiming at taking full control. Now there are other actors, and I say that the startups are other actors, and what is the employment relationship with these startups? We need to know much more about that. We know something about the jobs in SKA, LG, or BID, or CATL. We know perhaps less about what the jobs will be in companies like Northvolt, like Verk, that do not exist yet, or they have very few employees. And would they be as bad as those in Tesla that we have heard from different newspapers, articles, but we have not yet so many research in these companies, which are also difficult of access. So we need to know more if these companies can provide better employment relationship than those that we have seen so far, of the represented threat. And then we have the joint ventures, and we have the OEMs. And there is a chance that, as Mark just said, that OEMs will be central actors because they still control the products. They make clear input about the technology in the battery, so they can reorient the technology of the battery depending on what type of technology they want, the type of combination of raw materials. But they're very late, and they're relying on joint ventures. And these raise questions about who will define the employment relationship and the jobs in these companies. The Asian partners, is the automotive car makers, is the startup, and evidence so far suggests that the car makers are trying to downgrade the employment relationship here, create separate companies, cap the contracts, and creates lower paid jobs. And trade unions have the power to contest that. And the very good thing is that we see trade unions present in France, for example, but also in the United States with the UAW gaining access to this Ohio gigafactory. I think that this is more contested, but that will be a struggle about these future jobs. Will be fully integrated as automotive jobs. What will happen when workers shift from a powertrain companies to a battery making new company? In France, both Peugeot, Stellantis, and Renault have negotiated with trade unions guaranteed shift in which most of the wages and benefits are maintained for the workers who move from the powertrains nearby the new gigafactories to the new gigafactories. At the same time, we've seen that these concern a small amount of the workers, not the total workers. There are like 500 jobs that will be shifted in Stellantis on the 1,500 that exist in the current powertrain plant. So it's not clear if everybody will be able to benefit that. But the new jobs, that's clear already, the new jobs will not start at the same level than the powertrain plant, will be downgraded. And that, of course, opens question about the overall dynamic of that. So I will stop that, but clearly the struggle between these different industrial policies, different group of companies for controlling the future of the battery market, and what conception of control, it will be the lowest cost per kilowatt that will define who is the winner. It will be the greenest battery. It will be the shortest supply chain. It will be a regionalized market, global market. Depending on how things evolve, then the winners and the losers will not be the same. And the consequence for jobs will be very different. The new jobs will be very different.
Yes. Yes, lots to be sorted out, very dynamic environment. So why don't we do this? We have just under 30 minutes left for the Q&A. Let's have the audience a chance to jump in, and maybe we'll do it the way we typically do it in our in-person operations is let's gather a handful of questions. I don't know if you can all raise your hand. You don't have to use the chat. You can ask your question in person. So I don't know who wants to go first. Switch to the panel view here. All quiet on the Western Front. Okay, Margarita, please go ahead.
Many thanks. It's very interesting series of elements. I jump to the point that was mentioned at the end by Tommaso, because I think that there is an incredible need of studying and investigating what's happening and what will happen in the next years. And this worries me a lot, because in a situation in which trade unions seem to be more than ever key for the future of the quality of jobs because of their possibility of negotiating better jobs, I would be pleased to know that they are keen to study. Because what we observed, for example, in Spain recently, is that to some extent they had concluded some agreements just to maintain jobs. No different conditions. So to some extent, they are so much under pressure that I think that they are in a condition in which they could lose an opportunity of become important actors in the future of the quality of work. So this is my worry. I don't see so much trade union engaged in understanding the possibilities. They are more focused on the specific company in which they represent workers. And this transition that you have been described requires a completely different perspective. It must be not a company level perspective, but a broad perspective in a changing environment. So what is your opinion, Tommaso and the other speakers in the panel? Because this seems to me a quite worrying situation.
Okay, thanks, Margherita. I have, so that's worry about the future of the unions, not focusing on the big picture. It's number one. Somebody has raised their hand. There's, yes, M. Crosser, and then we go to Gregor.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, there. Hi, how are you? Nice to be here. It's been very, very interesting. Very nice to see some friends like Kristin, Tommaso. Hello, how are you? So I have my concern is on the role of Mexico in this just humongous restructuring of the auto industry. Maybe Kristin has some thoughts around this. Maybe Tommaso. I thought what Tommaso mentioned was very, very interesting in terms of the downgrading of jobs. And I feel, obviously, folks in the US must be very interested in seeing how, I mean, if there's a possibility of downgrading downgrading jobs happening in the US. But also I do feel that the electrification is taking, here in North America, there's a possibility electrification will be taking advantage of the uneven regional formation of North American wages, wage asymmetries, because maybe in Mexico, we won't be having a lot of battery production or even EV production, but we will be having, surprisingly, a lot of chip semiconductor assembly, very low value added assembly chip production, apparently. I mean, that's what's been announced in the last couple of days. So, you know, it's very interesting to see how this if there's probability of downgrading in terms of jobs, I'm very worried that the uneven structures of wages between the US and Mexico will be potentialized in this transformation. So I don't know if you guys have any thoughts around this. It would be really nice to hear what you think. Thank you very much. Very interesting presentation.
All right, great. Thank you. Thank you so much. So, well, let's take two more. There's Gregor's and then there's Jim.
Okay, so ask my question now. Thank you for the great presentation. It's really fantastic discussion here. I would have many questions, but I will ask only one to Tommaso regarding your account of the developments in Central and Eastern Europe, and your argument about the semi-peripheries may be a little bit on the side of the losers of this transformation. So I have some doubts regarding the narrative that you presented here. When I'm looking at the announced capacities of battery production in Europe, until 2030. What I'm seeing is the ranking, which shows Germany at number 1, and then we have Hungary and Poland number 2 and 3. Hungary having 200, I'm not sure what the unit is, gigawatt hours of output compared to over 300 in Germany. There are huge capacities planned for Hungary, also huge capacities planned for Poland. And then number 4, and so on, this is France, Sweden, and so forth. So is your account not underestimating the role of Central and Eastern Europe in this process? And then since you introduced the category of the semi-periphery here, maybe we just need a more nuanced approach now to differentiate between developments in different semi-peripheral countries within the EU. One, let's say, category will be Poland and Hungary with very strong, I would say, industrial policy involvement by the governments. Governments doing a lot to attract FDI in battery production, EV production, etc. And then when I'm still looking at this ranking, still this is from one article from Financial Times, maybe all wrong, but then really at the bottom of this list, I'm seeing Czech Republic and Slovakia really with low, more regionally low battery production capacities. Slovakia having 2 gigawatt hours plant announced until 2030. So compared to Hungary with 200, Poland with over 100, this is really a small number. So I'm just throwing this into the discussion as a provocation question, like what about Central and Eastern Europe? Are we not seeing different developments over there? And what about the role of governments, or what other kinds of factors might explain this? In fact, I would say strong position of at least 2 countries from Central and Eastern Europe in terms of battery production. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Gregors. That was the third one, so more nuanced view on Central Europe. And then Jim, you get to round out the first round of questions, and then we'll try to answer them and then go back if there's more time.
All right, I'll be quicker here, but it sort of follows on the previous question here. I was wondering, particularly our friends in Europe, if you could distinguish between battery cell production and battery pack, module and pack production. It seems that the OEMs may not be working the same way here. The factory here in Ohio, where I am, that's been referred to several times, GM is manufacturing cells. It's the individual battery cells. It's my understanding that Mercedes plant here is going to be outsourcing, is just going to be buying cells on the open market, and will be doing the module and pack production in-house in their factory down south. I'm not seeing consistency and uniformity in the actions of the OEMs with regard to how far back in the supply chain they want to go.
Okay. Distinction between cell and pack and what that means in terms of the big picture discussion. So 4 different questions. Let's give our 3 panelists a chance to chime in on any or all of them. Some were specifically asked. So let's go to Tommaso first, specifically Gregor's question about the nuanced view of Central Europe, and then any of the other ones you want to comment on.
Okay, thank you very much for these questions. And okay, about the semi-periphery in Europe, there is some materials that is available that have been published recently. In particular, I've read the Pavlinek article on transition of the automotive industry towards electric vehicles production in the East European integrated periphery. It's published in Empirica. And Pavlinek, we know, is a great expert, has been following the automotive industry very well. And basically saying, yes, Poland and Hungary have been successful because they've started early and because Korean battery makers wanted to take quickly control of the supply chain of Europe for the emerging battery vehicle market. So they're looking for cheapest location and they have already the technology. But he says that for example, the fact that the Czechia, which is the biggest producer of cars in the integrated periphery, is completely failing to attract new investments, suggests that the normal strategies that these countries develop to attract FDI do not really work very well for battery, which is that cheap labor is not so crucial. And the fact of providing training or infrastructure does not make it does not change the deal. And that other factors like access to energy, and these countries do not have access to cheap and clean energy, can be a factor. And active industrial policies by core countries can also be a factor, with OEMs wanting to have battery close, in particular joint ventures, their own battery, that will respond a little bit about Jim's questions, their own battery capacity developing nearby their core factories in high wages countries. So Pavlinik suggests that the capacity of the semi-peripheral countries integrated in the European value chain of attracting this investment is very much diminished by comparison with assembly or powertrain during the last 2 decades. And also, I mean, what I said, it was based on Sade and Ali report for the AQI that you might be familiar with. There are German colleagues from M5, if I'm not wrong. And they say that 80% of the new capacity is located in high wages countries. And of course, Hungary and Poland are the exceptions, but most of the investment will go to Germany and France and Italy and Spain and Sweden, and not so much to Slovakia, Czechia, or furthermore to Poland, even if the big Korean companies are still investing there. So that's some of the aspects of that I think we need to consider. And also it seems that startups tends to prefer to go in countries where they can find the high skill profile they need to catch up and fast development, mass production of battery in engineering and so on. And so Northvolt, British Volt, Verkor, the all headquarters, the core capacity are located in high wages countries for these reasons. And also the access to clean, renewable energies. Semi-peripheral countries are quite late in the transition to green energies, and these appear to be, according to the European regulatory framework for battery, crucial dimensions. If you regulate batteries by the footprint, CO2 footprint, and you produce them in Poland, you might end up having problems in terms of how you sell batteries in Europe, for instance. Then on Mexico, I think I give that to Kristin. And I don't know much. I've seen that by comparison with Hungary and Poland. Clearly, Mexico is not attracting gigafactories so far. But also, my only answer is that there is a period of transition that I believe will be longer in the United States, in which you have legacy internal combustion engine production that must go somewhere. And you might want to place all of that in low-cost countries as you shift your core production to electric battery vehicle production. And Mexico might be initially the recipient of perhaps even growing volume of production in internal combustion engine. To Marguerite, I think that what we are going to have is a restructuring process in powertrain production, in particular in the supply industry, in which indeed you can have a competition organized by companies and says, okay, you want to keep jobs, make the most of concessions. Otherwise, since we are going to shrinking, there is a lot of scope to put in competition and to relocate also in the same time. So that is a very bad news for employment. But at the same time, these core implication of industrial policy, state involvement in structuring the new industry, all this amount of public monies, I think gives leverage to trade unions at different levels, not at company levels, but the European level, national level, to bargain, to make arguments in favor of good jobs in the battery industry, in favor of labor clause in trade agreement, labor clause in battery regulations. So really in the regulatory framing, trade unions could have, together with Ministry of Labor, Ministry of Employment or NGOs, you have a possibility to redefine rules, like the USMCA, for example, that is the new trade agreement in the United States that has a labor clause. We might see perhaps more labor clause related to labor in the battery industry. So that, let's say, a battery which has in the value chain jobs that are less than $5 an hour or less than a certain amount of euros an hour, well, these batteries will not be accepted as valuable products inside the single market. Things like that. Okay, so that could be the positive side. The restructuring, of course, the negative side. And to finish with Jim, is we see the OEMs have different strategies. So they have long-term contracts with big Asian car makers to be sure they will get the batteries they need to ramp up productions. And so they're really tied up with several of these, LG, Samsung, SDI. Each car maker has its own strategies depending on the regions. Then they start to create joint ventures with them. And what is going on in these joint ventures is unclear. Are they using that to get the technology? Do they just want to bring these producers close to them so they can work out the best batteries adapted to their production process, integration in the value chain? What is going to happen in terms of technological transfer is unclear. But at the same time, are investing in startups. We see Volkswagen investing heavily in Northvolt. There is Envision, there is Renault investing in Envision and vice versa. There is GM that's investing in another company in solid battery state. Briefly, they're not just only looking at established partners, but also in startups to get the technology of tomorrow. And some of them, like Volkswagen in particular, they want to make their own batteries, moving into cells and even in mining and extracting. So Volkswagen wants to take control of the full value chain. So depending on the car makers, there is a degree of maturity, different degree of maturity in that, but there is clearly an attempt by some of them take control, at least the knowledge of the full value chain, eventually produce their own batteries. So it's really very heterogeneous landscape, but my feeling that they're trying to move there and there will be a lot of competition and struggle, very dynamic landscape.
All right, thanks, Tommaso. Kristin, there were a couple that went directly to you. Let's start with Mexico and then anything else.
I was going to start the other way because I'm going
to Okay, good. Go your way
then. So the role of the unions, I do want to suggest, as Thomas mentioned, the event we had last week and the discussion with the president of Unifor on what the union sees in Canada as this role. And then, go back to, the first bite at the apple that the Biden administration took on EV incentives had a special plus up for if the vehicle was made by union workers, that it was that got us to $12,500 instead of $7,500. And that was just not politically palatable at all in the U.S. or in it got Canada and Mexico kind of worked up too. So in the union was very very much trying to get a more broad-based role in the union's role in electrification through legislative means. And then the other sessions, like the workforce session, and then the conversation with the two women from the Biden administration that was on the second day, were also very instructive. There are the Inflation Reduction Act has a broad range of green technology and it's photovoltaics and it's hydrogen and it's all kinds of things. But there are strong prevailing wage requirements in building the facilities, and the Department of Energy has also reinvigorated a requirement that you pay a certain wage in order to get Department of Energy grants. So there is, political leverage and process to have a more broad-based approach versus just a company approach. And those two sessions, I think, are really good. Matteo. So, the Mexico, there was a forecast for a while that, GM's next gigafactory would go to Mexico. And it's the $45 a kilowatt hour that's really killing this. And I haven't seen much that the Mexican government has mounted much of approach to counter that. I know Canada is working on something in addition to a investment credit, the production credit. The Mexico has benefited, I think, from the ramping up of tariffs under the previous president and continuing them under this president, of a shift of electrical and electronic work out of China to Mexico. We saw that early on. And then, the Mexico and Canada just won a dispute versus the US over USMCA rules. So the USMCA when it was implemented in the US took a much more stringent requirement to the core parts content than either trading partner or the companies envisioned when they saw the language. So it was, so the US is lost. It's not entirely true or clear what the US is going to do now that they've lost, if they will lessen the requirements or if they will just keep doing what they were doing, which is possible. So, you know, I think there is certainly a big role for Mexico in electrical, electronic, and semiconductor as we regionalize those supply chains. I'm concerned about trucks. I'm concerned about truck production in Mexico. Trucks, of course, have the higher tariff into the US, 25%. And the build out of electric vehicle capacity, especially for the automakers, the Detroit automakers, is in trucks. Rivian is adding truck capacity. Ford is adding truck capacity. GM has, you know, turned over the Detroit Hamtramck plant to more truck capacity, and they're just, I don't think the truck market grows that much. So I expect rationalization in the truck supply chain or the truck footprint. And you have to look at the age of those facilities, the recent investment in those facilities, and I'm concerned about Saltillo and Silao, you know, with the higher tariff barrier and the shift to electrification in trucks, whether those stick around. And, you know, all of that is probably several years out because, you know, the way that plants come offline, I mean, we're going to have this just terrible capacity utilization as we do this shift, because none of the EV plants will be at scale, and none of the ICE plants will be losing scale. So I think it's, you know, very much a step function as this sort of gets down to a point and then it shifts. But the win at the dispute panel, if the US goes along with it, I think does have some hope for you know, Mexico having a strong role in consolidating the ICE side of things, as was suggested, that, you know, the need to get those products done at a lower cost and still high investment to meet the increasing fuel economy requirements. I think that might be where Mexico plays. And then, of course, there's close to 300 million ICE vehicles on the road that are going to need replacement parts and consumables and all of those things that, you know, Mexico already has a big role in. China has had a big role in, but I think it's going to shift very strongly to Mexico.
Thanks, Kristin. I got to ask Tommaso a quick rules question. So as we're coming to the end of time, can we run over? Is this a hard stop for in 2 minutes or?
We can, of course, do whatever we want, and people, of course, can do whatever they want. I think we have this 1 hour and a half to keep the engagement of the participants limited in time. We're also thinking about the sleeping time of Boy, who is not with us, but we were taking that into consideration. If we go over for 10 or 15 minutes, it's not absolutely a problem for anybody. And those for those who have problems, they can, of course, leave. No obligation to stay.
Got it. Yes. And so we're cognizant, obviously, that we're going to lose Asia pretty soon, just because it's going to be nighttime. And so that was the idea of limiting it to 90 minutes. On the other hand, we've got a really rich discussion here. If you're coming up on time, you have other commitments, you know, feel free to jump off. I think we can stay on a little longer. So for starters, I want to get Mark a chance to jump in. And specifically, I wonder, from your expertise on the production function side, if you could comment on Jim's question, you know, are there material differences between cell and pack production that you see that influence this discussion or not?
Yeah, I just want to go back to the question about what's happening in Poland and about the production of battery. Recently, I've attended a conference from the European Commission, and someone explained that there is a new investment, of course, for energy and greener energy, because the current situation with Russia and Ukraine. And what was said is that more than 50% of new investment goes to Germany, little bit less than 25 goes to France, and roughly a little bit less than 10 goes to Italy. So it means that only 15% goes to the other 24 countries of Europe, which means that in fact, as Tommaso said, the production of batteries is going to be a very strict control for CO2 footprint for battery production. We may expect that factories in Western countries, if they don't change the ways they don't change the energy they use, probably the production capacity of these plants is going to be not to be used in the future, maybe in 5 to 10 years. Going back to the production, what has been done usually till now is that in fact, battery makers make cells, automakers make the pack and the modules. As I said, there is a doubt about what's going to happen to modules because there are many reasons to suppress modules, reason of cost, reason of volume, reason of energy efficiency. But basically, this is the split between battery maker and automaker. Do we see that automakers want to jump into the business of cells? Not so obvious, because it's really a very, very complicated process, which is completely out of the usual knowledge of automakers. Obviously, automakers know enough about battery management to jump in and, as I said, to have capacity to design battery management system or to increase battery energy efficiency by their own actions. But jumping into the process of production, I don't think it's highly probable. What happened is that Volkswagen actually had a joint venture with Northvolt in Germany, and they decided to buy the plant. So now they fully own this plant, and Northvolt is just only providing the technology. So I think that what we could see is automakers, I would say, owning the gigafactory, but probably battery maker operating the battery cell production side of the gigafactory. But I don't see the interest of automaker to jump too deeply into the production of cells because, as I said, it's very complex. It's a very different job from what the automotive industry is used to. As you may know, there is a probable jump to another technology, which is solid state. So why should automaker jump in the actual technology when the new one is said to arrive in 5 to 6 years? And there is another question from Giulio in the chat. And I think he's asking a very interesting question, which is the impact of labor cost on batteries? And I think it's a very interesting question. And in fact, the impact is quite low. What costs a lot in battery is raw materials, of course, and the cost of raw material is increasing and increasing with all the events happening in the last years. And the second impact is depreciation, because it's a lot of investment to produce battery, and mainly battery cells. When I say that you need 5 cells per second, I just let you imagine the level of investment you need to produce this huge quantity of cells when you imagine that probably in 10 years, you will have to produce 40 million of battery electric vehicles in the world, or maybe more. So 2 main points, cost of raw material and depreciation. So the labor cost, I don't think this is the main factor in the total cost of the battery pack. That's the first point. And the second point is, at least in Europe, when you have a strong regulation about battery footprint and battery reuse of different raw materials, it obviously pushes to localization. This is what is meant by the European Commission. They want localization of the production of batteries. So it means that they ask, in other words, they ask the industry to try to find good compromise to achieve batteries which gives the expected level of performance for the customers on the one side, on the other side to find a good economical compromise to make vehicles more accessible to most of the customers than they are right now.
All right. Thank you, Mark. I think that concludes our go around for the first round of questions. I don't know if there's appetite for more questions from the audience.
There are a few in the chat. There's one about demand that's interesting.
Who wants to take that? Anybody?
Well, I thought it was interesting, so I'll take it for a moment.
There you go.
Yeah. And I think it's access to the demand side and class divide and access to EVs. I mean, the fact is that a new vehicle in the US is a luxury good, period. They are unbelievably expensive. The monthly payment has just topped $777 a month, including interest and finance charges and stuff. So it is out of the range for most moderate income individuals. So, and EVs even more so. EVs have about a 35% cost premium right now. There are plans to address that with lower cost EVs. And of course, we saw Tesla just slash prices in the last week or so, largely to get under the thresholds for the consumer credit, which their vehicles needed to cost less than $80,000 for the SUVs and $55,000 SUVs and trucks and vans and $55,000 for cars. There was some dispute about how Treasury defined SUVs, making the Tesla Model Y a car and not an SUV. So they needed to slash there, and they're already very, very profitable. So they were, just taking out some profits. It does concern investors and stockholders in Tesla about the sort of fire sale prices that came on market, as well as existing owners who, just recently bought a vehicle at that price. The US policy also has an incentive for used EVs. I don't know how effective it will be. It's vehicles less than $25,000 and have to be at least 2 years old can get like $4,000. But I think that just makes every used EV cost $24,999 and may, inflate the used vehicle price for EVs for a while. We have a access to transportation issue writ large, and access to personal transportation issue is really putting the squeeze on there. So it's a big concern, I think, with these very, very high prices, very high interest rates. I didn't do my disclaimer, not speaking for my boss or the Central Bank of the United States here, but yeah, it's new vehicles, used vehicles are all very unaffordable for moderate and lower income people in the US right now, and it's a huge concern.
All right. We're at what is it? Almost 10 minutes over, and I want to be cognizant. Yeah, go ahead.
I think this is an important question because when I look at the replay of your conference, which I suggest everybody to do that, the symposium, it's just a lot of excellent informations and very high level speakers. So but there was sort of contradiction. The first day was about affordability and the fact that everybody said, well, it's going to be a disaster. I mean, there are really clear signs that this impacts not only new vehicles, but second-hand vehicles. Since the supply of cars shrinks, then the value of second-hand cars increase, and that creates, it makes also more difficult to make the EV transition. So the first day was really a lot about that. And then the second day was, well, this is a great opportunity for work and employment, and we will create a lot of new manufacturing jobs, will be high quality jobs. This is all very good and so on. And I don't think that you do balance too, because it is true that for example, work is not such a big input in battery manufacturing, but it still represents, according to some sources, I've seen 10% of the total cost of a battery, just in the gigafactory. But if you extend the whole value chain and you want to shorten, so you get also the raw materials you get mined in United States and Europe, and then the refinery, and then the electrodes, and then you put together all of these in a high wage countries, higher taxes and whatever, then the impact on the cost of the battery will be there. And the battery is 30, 40% of the total cost of an EV, and the main reason why it's so more expensive. So it is a question to me, how do you balance the need of making electric vehicles cheap for two reasons? If you want to reach 100% electric vehicles in 2035 or 40, you need to sell to everybody. I mean, at least to increase the market share. So you need to go down the price level to spread the technology. And two, otherwise, nobody has a car. The access to these green vehicles will become extremely problematic, and people will hold on to very old ICE. So you need to make the electric vehicle cheaper. But if you regionalize the value chain for battery, which is the most important component of the electric vehicle, you don't raise the cost. And this has already been said in Europe. You say, well, the battery produced in Europe will be more expensive than those imported from China. This is why we need regulation that push car makers to buy these batteries and do not import batteries from China, or they just batteries from Poland and Hungary. So this is coming up already as an issue. And I think it's an important question. And so I believe there are contradictions here in terms of what you would like on one side, more affordability, and what you would like on the other side, good jobs and the whole value chain with due diligence. And what will happen? I mean, who will win? We will have more expensive personal transportation, and we'll deal with that. We will get worse jobs, so eventually the big Asian companies with bad employment conditions will win. I think this is not sorted out yet in terms of the dynamic.
Well, if I could jump in, Tommaso, one big difference, and those of you who have been to the United States or came last summer to the Gerpisa, you may notice that, we are a very strange market with very large vehicles. And I often say you can't get 50% of Americans to agree on anything. So certainly not on type of propulsion system for their vehicle. We had a state last week pass a resolution to, there are states that are banning internal combustion engine vehicles. Wyoming passed a thing banning electric vehicles. So I think we're going to have this shift and struggle in the US to get the market share much above, where the projections are, the 30, 35, 40%. I mean, the target is 50, but getting 50% of Americans to agree on anything is not going to happen in the near future. So I think we're going to remain fairly ICE heavy in the US for a while. And certainly the more moderate income people will be driving ICE. This also opens up a bottom end of the market for somebody who might come in to make the Econobox more affordable transportation. If everything else has gone out of people's reach, that could very well happen.
I just can add something. This is a question from Bruno in the chat, which is very interesting. He says, who is going to pay the cost of recycling? The customer. And in fact, there is something we haven't been talking about, and I think it's going to be quite important, is what is going to happen in the after sale. I said that in Europe, there is very strong regulation with going to impose to recycle roughly 70% of the content and raw materials of the battery. So it means that you really need to have a new business, a new industry. Who is going to do that? What is going to be the new ecosystem to have a chance to collect the batteries, do the recycling, organize the reuse of these new raw materials in the production of new battery cells? I think this is a huge part of the industry which is not existing at the time being, and it's not so obvious to find out who are going to be the key actors in this new industry. And I think this is also a very important issue we have to tackle, because it will have a huge importance globally on the cost we will have. Is it going to be a chance to reduce the cost of the battery or not? Will we have a Rumble effect, which would be so terrible that it's not going to decrease the cost of the batteries? Is it going to be a failure in terms of recycling, in terms of improvements of the battery footprint? So I think this part of the industry must be part of our next studies, because obviously there is a new industry arising there with many questions in terms of cost, in terms of efficiency.
All right, thank you, Mark. So first of all, I want to thank, I know some of our panelists are now facing constraints, including my own schedule. So I'm going to take the prerogative of the moderator of this session, and I want to close out with, not just thanking everybody in the audience for sticking around and peppering us with really, really important questions, but also to the presenters. This was a powerful go around. And if there's anything, there's two things we've learned. Number one, there's a lot more to talk about. There's very much that we still don't know yet. But also, I want to bend it back to the role of this network. I think this is a great way to actually have this discussion, because we bring a lot to the table. Not sort of touting our own horn too much here, but the ability to draw on intelligence and knowledge from around the major regions of the world in a dramatic change like this is an invaluable resource to have such a powerful and important discussion. So very much looking forward to continuing the discussion in person in Brussels. Keep up the working groups, Lorenza and Tommaso. Thank you very much, and thanks for putting this on. We in economics, we have a standing phrase is watch what people do, and we had over 40 people sign up for this webinar, and there's still 35 online right now. So I think that's a very powerful signal. This is an important discussion, so to be continued for sure. So thanks to all from Chicago. I'm signing off, and hope to see most of you in person soon, and keep up the good work.
I will just add that the call for papers for the colloquium will be out finally next week. It's almost done. And with that, all the details about the conference. So we hope to see you, all of you in Brussels, and we will definitely have a special stream for all these questions about battery industry, battery production, battery technology, business models, and jobs.
Great, thank you, bye-bye.
Bye.